We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly. I appreciate very much.
Logo depois dos ataques do 11 de setembro, todos no governo de George W. Bush se concentraram em um só objetivo: encontrar e punir os culpados e garantir a segurança da América. Ficou claro que era preciso mudar a estratégia de defesa e a política externa do país, que ainda usavam o modelo da Guerra Fria. Apenas algumas horas depois de os aviões atingirem as Torres Gêmeas e o Pentágono, a Casa Branca já estava preparando uma nova estratégia.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
Iria buscar os responsáveis, Osama Bin Laden e a Al-Qaeda, onde eles estavam escondidos, no Afeganistão. Era o início da guerra contra o terror. Aos poucos, entre os assessores de George Bush, começaram a aparecer diferenças sobre como combater o terrorismo. Donald Rumsfeld e Dick Cheney formavam a linha dura da política externa. Eram os falcões no jargão americano. Não hesitaram em usar informações duvidosas para levar o país à guerra contra o Iraque.
Presidential decisions are shaped by the people around you. 9/11 changed the course of history and led to the hardest decision any president can make, deploying American troops into combat.
The United States strongly.
Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, Paul Wolfowitz, os neoconservadores, apoiavam a ofensiva militar porque tinham uma doutrina. Acreditavam que derrubando o regime ditatorial no Iraque, iriam criar uma democracia no país, um regime aliado a Washington. O ataque à sede da ONU em Bagdá em 2003 levantou o alerta. O Iraque seria uma operação mais longa e mais complexa do que o esperado. Tratava-se de uma guerra de guerrilhas, e uma vez derrubado Saddam Hussein, não seria fácil garantir a paz e plantar a democracia no Iraque. John Yoo, conselheiro no Departamento de Justiça, Jay Bybee, vice-procurador-geral, e Alberto Gonzalez, assessor jurídico do presidente, advogavam métodos duros de interrogatório para lidar com presos e obter informações sobre suspeitos. Eles atropelaram as próprias leis americanas e violaram tratados internacionais. O secretário de Estado, general Colin Powell, se manteve firme. Quis respeitar as leis internacionais e os princípios democráticos dos Estados Unidos que regulam o tratamento de inimigos na guerra. Quando a tortura foi instaurada como doutrina, Colin Powell advertiu para os perigos. O que ele temia aconteceu. O Sem Fronteiras vai mostrar como era a defesa dos Estados Unidos antes do 11 de setembro, o que mudou com os ataques, o que deu certo e o que ficou como herança para o governo atual. Antes de 11 de setembro, o governo americano não estava focado em política externa. Tratava-se de temas que nem sequer agitaram a campanha presidencial.
I just don't think it's the role of the United States to walk into a country and say, we do it this way, so should you.
Yeah, before 9/11, one of the ironies, as we look back, is that, and people often forget this, is that George W. Bush actually came into office in 2001 with a foreign policy that was oriented around reducing America's imprint and footprint around the world. He saw the Clinton administration as having been too involved with getting involved with humanitarian crises and nation building and too much, sort of foreign assistance and human rights concerns. And Bush wanted to withdraw America back to a more traditional, limited role in the world. That was the first 8 months foreign policy doctrine of the Bush administration.
George Bush was a very, very different man prior to 9/11.
I think we've got to be very careful when we commit our troops. The Vice President and I have a disagreement about the use of troops. He believes in nation building. I would be very careful about using our troops as nation builders. I believe the role of the military is to fight and win war and therefore prevent war from happening in the first place.
Nos primeiros meses de governo, George W. Bush tinha apenas começado a definir uma agenda internacional, que incluía pressionar a Coreia do Norte a não desenvolver armas nucleares, conter o avanço militar da China e, eventualmente, voltar ao Iraque 10 anos depois da Guerra do Golfo. Os Estados Unidos eram, de longe, a maior potência bélica do planeta. E o objetivo principal dos responsáveis pela defesa do país era modernizar o Pentágono, torná-lo compatível com o século XXI. Isso era o que Donald Rumsfeld e sua equipe discutiam com alguns parlamentares republicanos no exato momento em que os Estados Unidos foram atacados.
Well, I think there was a need for reorganization, and Rumsfeld's hope was that he could use this new crisis to assist him in his as yet unwon battle to get the Pentagon to transform. And so the first combat in Afghanistan between our forces and the Taliban is very much a light footprint. It's this new cyber blitzkrieg where we have satellite linkages which give us eyes and ears that no one's ever had before on the battlefield, and it was immensely successful.
But in terms of the way the White House directed?
Well, there is the story that Richard Clarke and others have put forward that the focus of the Bush White House was on Iraq, and that by September 12th they were looking at battle plans for Iraq. And there is a story that Richard Clarke tells that Rumsfeld was pushing him to find evidence that Iraq was somehow involved, and when told it is Afghanistan, the response is there aren't enough targets in Afghanistan. There are those who allege, and the evidence is murky, that the Bush administration was already thinking about Iraq on September 12, 2001.
In this reorganization of the military, there was this option called Gulf War II. Mm-hmm. What was Gulf War II?
Well, the Pentagon is always doing contingency plans, and they would be lax in their jobs if they weren't. But there were people at the Project for a New American Century that were later, many of the people like Cheney, like Rumsfeld, like Wolfowitz, ended up in very important positions in the Bush administration, who'd been saying, we have to take out Saddam Hussein. And they were saying this not in 2001 or 2002, they were saying this in 1995, 1996. And they were releasing position papers saying, for the security of the region, for the security of Israel perhaps, we have to take out Saddam.
Did that have any traction in the administration in the beginning?
No, not prior to 9/11. 9/11 makes the Iraq War possible. Without 9/11, you could not have gotten the Democratic votes in the House and the Senate that approved the use of force.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war.
once the attacks happened, it was quickly recognized that there was too much of a threat out in the world for the United States to have a much smaller role in the world, and Bush essentially went in a complete reverse direction.
And that was well known as the Bush Doctrine.
Well, the Bush Doctrine came out of the National Security Strategy, which was a 2003 document. The National Security Strategy document, which was the first real break from Cold War strategy, which oriented American foreign policy around deterring threats from around the world, mostly targeting countries that might threaten us. But after September 11th, 2001, it was recognized that the main threat to the United States was not from another country, but from a non-state global actor. So the preemption doctrine of the Bush administration after 2002 was a new direction for American foreign policy that was much more oriented around being aggressive and preventing or preempting threats before they actually materialize and hit America again in its homeland.
But then, between 9/11, the invasion of Afghanistan, and 2003, the invasion of Iraq, you have to build a case.
Well, it was built on three things. First, drawing a connection between al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. Were there communications between al-Qaeda and certain elements of Saddam Hussein's regime? Yes. But were they operational? Was there any activity that would rise to the level of the insinuations and the statements of Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney? Absolutely not. The intelligence did not support what they said. But they also linked Saddam Hussein to WMD. And there were a lot of people all over the world who thought, yeah, probably Saddam has something. But there's a difference between thinking he might have something and thinking you have grounds to go to war. And the final link was what was called the axis, the rogue states, terrorism, and the threat of WMD, the three things put together. And in the end, freedom for the Iraqis, that was thrown in like parsley at a Texas steakhouse. It was a side dish that months after the rest of those arguments fell apart, that became the reason we had gone to war, as if we would all forget those other reasons. I honestly don't think George Bush thought he was lying. His CIA director said it's a slam dunk, the case for the war, the connection between Saddam and al-Qaeda. So Bush is not a liar in the sense that someone knowingly telling you a lie. Now, people around him, such as Donald Rumsfeld, were using flawed intel that they knew or should have known was flawed, making real leaps and looking right in the camera and lying to the people. And Rumsfeld still does it today. The German intelligence, prior to Powell's speech, told our intel community, don't trust this. And that message never got to Powell. George Tenet, sitting behind Colin Powell, knew that was a lie when Powell said it. Powell did not know it was a lie. Tenet did.
What you will see is an accumulation of facts and disturbing patterns of behavior. The facts in Iraq's behavior demonstrate that Saddam Hussein and his regime have made no effort to disarm as required by the international community.
When the torture became something either accepted or encouraged?
Well, it was in the sort of the bloodstream of the nation in the fall and the winter of 2001. You had people like Alan Dershowitz, a professor at Harvard, talk about the need for torture warrants. And you had Jonathan Alter in Newsweek, a very well-known columnist, talk about everyone's thinking about torture now because there is almost a mathematical relationship in world affairs where terrorism leads to torture.
The agency initially redacted or censored about 100 pages of the original 250 pages of my book.
O vice-diretor de inteligência para ameaças transnacionais, Glenn Carlin, hoje aposentado, foi dos muitos oficiais da CIA deslocados para trabalhar com contra-terrorismo após o 11 de setembro.
But I didn't know what I was agreeing to do. I was then told to go to a room in a different part of the CIA in our counterterrorism center where I would be briefed. And the briefing was, okay, listen, we've just captured, which in this instance meant kidnapped off of a street in the Middle East, one of the top members of Al-Qaeda, top half dozen or so. We believe that he may well lead us to Osama bin Laden. At the least, he will help us seriously damage Al-Qaeda as an organization. We're interrogating him. The interrogation is not going as we would like, and you will do whatever it takes to get him to talk. Do you understand? I understood what that meant, and I said, well, we don't do that. Then the reply was, well, we do now. I took us to be talking about what came to be called enhanced interrogation techniques, something quite disturbing. So I wanted to make sure we got this right. And I said, well, we would need at least a presidential order to do that. And the response was, well, we have it.
We authorized torture against high-value detainees who had actionable intelligence. So it was supposed to be rare circumstances that we would use this. And we quickly set up illegal, secret detention centers in many different countries. We don't know how many even today, but there's some certainly in Poland, some in Afghanistan, maybe Romania, maybe some others. And we subjected people to, at first, about 12 techniques: isolation, sleeplessness, sleep deprivation, nudity, forced nudity, temperature changes, exposure to barking dogs, mild slaps, and so on and so forth. The most extreme and most famous is waterboarding. And all of these tactics had been held at one time or another to be torture by our own government. But under these limited circumstances, with a doctor present, with high-value detainees, it was all held to be legal by our own government.
We all define ourselves and our sense of self and our perceptions based on our five senses. So we know, and it will sound silly, but it's very important, gravity takes us down. The sun comes up every morning. I normally will eat 3 meals a day. I will sleep at a certain roughly similar period each day. All of these things are now unconscious for us, but they allow us to interact with the world and understand who we are. And if you dislocate the person's perceptions so that he can't orient where the sun is, or if it comes up, or how long he sleeps, or has he eaten, and
he's
what
transported
noise is
to
like,
another reality.
He becomes detached from himself. It's shocking.
This took place physically where?
Well, I was in 2 countries during the period that I interrogated Captus, this detainee. One is a country I'm not allowed to name, but where we worked with, where we, meaning the CIA, and I worked with our foreign counterparts from another intelligence service, which had agreed to hold this man. During the day, I would, or my colleagues, depending on the circumstance, would interrogate him or interview him or question him, whatever you want to call it. But he was formally under the possession and the control of this foreign intelligence service. The second country he was sent to, he was completely under U.S., under CIA control in our most severe, I believe, detention facility.
Glenn não pode citar nomes nem países, mas provavelmente se refere à prisão de Bagram, no Afeganistão, e ao Marrocos. Ele interrogava um homem que trabalhava com remessas de dinheiro no Oriente Médio e concluiu que o homem não operava diretamente nem com Bin Laden, nem com a Al-Qaeda, mas mesmo sem provas, foi mantido preso por 8 anos.
Who thought Guantanamo?
Guantanamo was a solution to the legal question involved in capturing terrorists, that you don't want to come under American law or Geneva.
The dilemma for all American intelligence and military officers was that the laws became, and our guidance became, contradictory. There's the Convention Against Torture, the Geneva Convention, Uniform Code of Military Justice, Executive Order 12333, which guides CIA operations, all of which have clear standards of what is acceptable behavior or not. Then there's the letter from the Attorney General from John Yoo, actually, which has come to be called the torture memo or letter from July 2002, and subsequent memoranda, which have a whole different standard. They say the President authorizes the CIA to do the following things. Those letters and that guidance are clearly incompatible with the other legal guidance. So an American official was put in a very difficult position. Which law does one obey?
You also have in the Bybee memo, though, an assertion of what we know as the unitary presidency, the assertion that something can be legal, even if it is illegal under our law and international law, because the president says so. And as commander-in-chief, if he's defending America, he can break the law. Now, that assertion was eventually rejected by the Bush administration itself. But that just gives you an idea of how many crazy ideas were in the bloodstream.
What were the unintended consequences of this war on terror?
There are plenty of unintended consequences. The upside was the United States has done a pretty good job of reducing the capacity and reducing the capability of the central al-Qaeda organization. But that came at a pretty big expense, and the big expense was that the United States has now expended trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives and thousands more lives around the world in this so-called war on terrorism, which is very unsettling and has damaged America's reputation around the world.
For the people of Afghanistan and for our shared security, the work must be done. America can't do this alone. The Afghan people need our troops and your troops, our support and your support to defeat the Taliban and al-Qaeda, to develop their economy, and to help them rebuild their nation.
And what has changed during the Obama administration?
Obama, along with changing sort of the rhetoric and the tone of American foreign policy, has maintained nearly all of Bush's hardline policies. That would include the Patriot Act, domestic spying. It would include indefinite detentions of terrorist suspects. It includes drone strikes. It includes renditions where American forces pick up suspected terrorists and bring them to third-party countries to be detained. So Obama has maintained a lot of the aggressive Bush policies in fighting terrorism. At the same time, he has tried to change the context or the tone of American foreign policy to try to have America not feel so isolated with the world.